Businesses are on the attack trying to defend their use of stock buybacks to enrich shareholders. But is there any basis for it? Let's talk about it in today's video. Hi, I'm Mike Greiner. I'm a lifelong Democratic activist who's concerned about the direction our country is taking. I'm also a lawyer and an academic, and I'm here to help you stand up to the BS of the MAGA crowd. Well, as it turns out, the subject that I teach is actually business management, particularly strategy. And I teach in a business school, a major business school here in the Midwest. And one of the major topics of my research has been CEOs and their behavior and how their decisions and their limitations impact the company as a whole. Well, with that in mind, you could imagine my interest when I saw articles, for example, by George Will defending the use of stock buybacks, claiming that Democrats and those progressives are out to lunch, arguing against stock buybacks, basically arguing for redistributive policies that are going to stop people from innovating and creating more wealth. I was especially taken by an article in the New York Times in their deal book that's written by Andrew Ross Sorkin, where he looks at how Warren Buffett is arguing for stock buybacks while Joe Biden is arguing against them. I'm not going to bore you with all the details here, but let's suffice it to say that the article goes through pros and cons of both issues and then says, the verdict, according to Garcia Feiju, a prevailing view is emerging. Buybacks are not so bad. Buffett wins the argument, he says. Well, that might be true if your only goal is helping investors. The problem is, stock buybacks as a whole really aren't good for the economy. You see, as I explain to my students, there are basically two things that businesses can do with their profits. They can either give some of those profits to the shareholders in the form of dividends, or they can reinvest those funds back into the business in the form of what are called retained earnings. Well, as it turns out, I lied to my students. There's actually a third thing they can do, which is to buy back stock. Now, buying back stock increases the share price of the business for at least two reasons. The first one is that they reduce the total amount of outstanding stock out there. In other words, there are fewer shares to go around, so as a result, each share that's left out there is worth more money. They also tend to be a signal that's sent to Wall Street that, hey, the company is doing so well that we have the money to buy back shares, which then in of itself will also increase the value of the shares. Now, as it turns out, our tax code actually gives certain benefits to stock buybacks, where they are not taxed at anywhere near the same level that either business profits are or dividends, which is part of the reason that President Biden has been calling for an increase in the taxes on stock buybacks. Now, although I don't like the fact that stock buybacks basically enrich shareholders to the detriment of everybody else, and really don't benefit society as a whole in any way, shape, or form, those aren't actually my biggest problems with them. My biggest problems are that they're the sign of a lazy leadership team. And I say, a lot of my research looks at the behavior of CEOs and how good they are at managing the business for the benefit of the shareholders. As it turns out, a lot of the time, they're not very good at it. There's this whole area of research that I'm involved in called agency theory, which basically says that CEOs oftentimes will be too busy taking care of their own personal needs to take care of the interests of the shareholders as a whole. Now, you might be asking why I'm not more concerned about the employees, and in fact, I am. But unfortunately, the way American law is set up, it requires the CEOs to worry about the shareholders and nobody else. That's just the way American law is. It doesn't have to be that way. In Germany, they actually have a law that requires that a company's leadership, once it reaches a certain size, has to take into account the interests of the employees. In fact, the employees have to be given a certain number of board seats. That, though, is not the law in the United States. It's also part of the reason I'm such a big believer in unions, because I know that the employers are specifically required not to worry about the employees. So employees need to be able to worry about themselves, and that's what unions do. But coming back to the issue of stock buybacks, if stock buybacks were restricted, or at least made more expensive, then the CEOs would have to work very hard to increase the value of the company. You see, without stock buybacks, the way that they increase the value of the shares is by making the company more valuable. That's done by investing in new businesses and investing in growth and creating new profit centers for the company. But that's hard work that requires innovation and creativity. It's much easier for the CEOs to simply say, hey, we're going to buy back a bunch of the stock and make the shareholders happy. And in theory, again, that is their responsibility. But in the long run, they're not really increasing the overall value of the company. And to me, when CEOs say that they don't have any good investments that they can make with their profits, that's the sign of a lazy, uncreative manager. A classic case would be Boeing. I remember reading about how at one point, after they'd created the 777, an unqualified product by any stretch of the imagination, the company bought back so much stock that the amount of money that they spent on buying back stock could have developed a whole new airplane. But it's easier to buy back stock than to do the hard work of building an airplane, even though that ultimately is better for the company and for the shareholders. And, by the way, for the employees and society as a whole. So when I see these complaints of investors arguing that stock buybacks are a good thing, I say that they're an out for lazy managers who don't want to do the hard work of creating real value in the company. And that's why, to me, stock buybacks should be discouraged. Well, if you want to see another video where I talk about how businesses actually provided support, in many cases for the January 6th objectors, check out this video over here. I'll see you then. In the meantime, let's hope for continued progress. Thank you.